My name is Alara Quinn, 22 years old. The night before what was supposed to be the proudest day of my life, I sat in my small bedroom, the iron hissing softly as I pressed the wrinkles from my graduation gown. The fabric felt heavier than it looked, as though it carried every sleepless night, every exam that left my hands trembling, every time I had pushed past my parents' voices telling me I would never amount to anything. I ran my fingers along the satin folds, tracing the stitched emblem, imagining myself walking across the stage. Just one more night, I told myself. One more night, and the world would see me as more than the shadow they said I was. I wanted to believe that. I needed to. But deep down, I should have known better. The door to my room swung open without a knock, like it always did, as if my parents believed I didn't deserve privacy. My mother stood in the doorway, her eyes glinting with a cruel satisfaction I recognized too well. In her hand, she carried a pair of electric clippers. For a moment, my brain refused to connect the dots. Then my stomach dropped. "Still pretending you're somebody?" she sneered, her voice sugar-sweet and venomous at once. Behind her, my father appeared, already holding his phone aloft like he was front row at a comedy show. He chuckled. "Go on, do it. Let's see if baldness makes her future look any less pathetic." My hand froze on the iron. The hiss of steam filled the silence, a mocking soundtrack to my unraveling. "Mom, please, not tonight. Not tomorrow. This is my graduation." She crossed the room in 2 swift strides, the scent of her heavy perfume preceding her. Her hand clamped down on my shoulder, nails digging into my skin. "Exactly why tonight," she said coldly. "You don't deserve to stand up there pretending you're some achiever. You're ours, and we'll decide how the world sees you." The clippers buzzed to life. The sound filled my ears, sharp and menacing. I gripped the chair's arms until my knuckles turned white. "Please," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Don't do this. Not tomorrow. I've worked for years." Her fingers tightened. "And you'll leave this house the same way you came into it. Nothing." The first lock fell, sliding down the front of my gown, landing in my lap like a dead thing. Hot tears blurred my vision. I gasped, then screamed, but my father only laughed louder, snapping photo after photo. "Oh, this is gold," he cackled. "Wait until the family group chat sees this. Best joke we've ever pulled." Each pass of the clippers ripped away more than hair. It stripped my identity, my dignity, the careful armor I had built to face the world. The strands scattered at my feet, pooling like a burial mound for the girl I had tried so hard to become. I begged, I thrashed, but they were immovable. My mother's lips curled into a smile of triumph, as though destroying me gave her purpose. My father's eyes shone with entertainment, not shame. When the buzzing finally stopped, I sat trembling, scalp raw, tears streaming down my cheeks. My mother tilted my chin upward with the edge of the clippers. "Look at you," she spat. "Bald, like your future." My father crouched, shoving his phone in my face. The flash seared my eyes, catching every tear. "Perfect," he laughed. "Tomorrow they'll clap for your degree, but laugh at your head. Finally, you're good for something. Comic relief." The room spun. My breath came in shallow bursts, but inside, a new sound began to grow louder than the clippers, louder than their laughter. It was the echo of every humiliation I had endured before this one. A memory surfaced, me at 8 years old, standing in front of relatives while my mother pulled at my crooked teeth, calling me ugly duckling until everyone laughed. At 14, when my father read aloud my failed math test to dinner guests, clapping as though it were stand-up comedy. Every moment had been training for this final act. They didn't see me as their daughter. I was their favorite spectacle. But this time, as their laughter echoed in my ears, something shifted. I felt it, a spark beneath the humiliation, small but alive. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My scalp throbbed with every heartbeat, pressed against the damp pillow. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw my reflection, my pale face, my bare head, the hollow girl staring back. My parents' laughter replayed on a loop, clawing at the walls of my mind. And yet somewhere between sobs, a thought flickered. Sharp, dangerous. If tomorrow was supposed to be their grand joke, then maybe the real punchline would be mine. I turned toward the wall, hairless, broken, but still breathing. My parents thought they had stripped me of everything, but they didn't see the seed they had planted with every cruel word, every forced smile, every cut they had made over the years. Tomorrow, I promise myself, I will walk that stage. They can laugh, they can sneer, but this will not end with me broken. I didn't know yet what form my resistance would take. I only knew that their cruelty had stopped being something I ran from. It had become something I would use. As dawn crept in through the window, painting the walls with pale light, I whispered to myself, voice hoarse but steady, "This is the last time they'll laugh without consequence." And with that vow etched into me deeper than any wound, I closed my eyes, not in peace, but in preparation. Morning came like a harsh light thrown on a crime scene. I sat in front of the mirror and traced the new geography of my head. Skin where there should have been hair, a tender ache in every pore. The reflection didn't feel like me at first. It felt like the punchline to a joke someone else wrote. My cap and gown lay folded on the bed. The tassel looked festive, almost childish. On any other day, it might have been sweet. Today it felt like a prop. Through the door, I could hear them moving about the kitchen, the rattle of dishes, the low hum of their amusement. My father's voice floated down the hall, stage loud, even at home. "Think she's gluing it back on?" he said, delighted with himself. My mother's laughter cut through, thinner and sharper. "Let the world see what she is," she answered. "Nothing dressed up as something." I swallowed. Anger rose hot in my throat, but I pressed it down until it cooled into something steadier. If I fed it, they'd win. I needed another fuel. I picked up the mortarboard and set it carefully on my head. It didn't fit. It wobbled, absurdly light on the bare skin. I pinned it twice, then a third time. Even so, it perched like doubt. By the front door, I stalled, fingers on the knob. My scalp stung when the morning air hit it. On the stoop, Mrs. Patel from across the street looked up from watering her plants. She blinked when she saw me, then tried to smooth her face into neutrality and failed. Her little boy, Soham, stared with the startled curiosity of a child who hasn't learned to conceal anything. "Did you fight a dragon?" he asked, earnest. My mother, stepping out behind me, plastered on a mock sympathetic smile. "No, dear," she purred. "Sometimes the monster lives inside the house." She squeezed my elbow hard enough to leave marks and walked past, humming. At the venue, the parking lot boiled with families, flowers, camera flashes. Summer air pressed close. A photographer pivoted toward us like a sunflower, then faltered when he clocked me. "Over there," my father directed, pointing his phone at my face as if I were a landmark. "Get the shine." My mother leaned toward a couple in the row behind our assigned seats, her voice pitched just high enough to carry. "We shaved her ourselves," she confided. "You have to laugh or you'll cry, right?" The woman gave a ghastly little chuckle that sounded like apology, dressed as amusement. Sister arrived late on a tide of perfume and attention, gliding down the aisle in her own gown, gold honor cords tidily draped. Her lips barely moved when she leaned into me. "Careful when the spotlights hit," she murmured. "Try not to blind the dean." Her friends tittered on cue. Their bracelets chimed like tiny bells at a funeral. Announcements crackled. The banner over the stage declared congratulations in letters so cheerful they verged on mockery. I kept my eyes on it because it was easier than meeting anyone's gaze. The mortarboard felt lighter with each minute, as if my head were trying to float away. I touched the edge of the cap, a ritual to keep from shaking. Names began. Rose rose, shuffled, sat, rose again. The sound in the auditorium melted into a single, indistinct roar, the human equivalent of surf. When they were 6 names from mine, my father stood to reposition for a better angle. I could feel the lens like a finger pressed to my forehead. 4 names. My mother turned in her seat and said to no one and everyone, "Wait until you see her up there." 2 names. My heart adjusted itself inside my chest, doing whatever organ does when it stops trying to be brave and starts trying to endure. They called me. I stood. The cap wobbled. Hands clapped in scattered politeness that landed like rain beginning to think about becoming a storm. The stage steps were too narrow. I focused on the dean's shoes because they were safe and ordinary and because they were not my parents'. Lights hit my scalp and turned it into a mirror. I heard it. First a murmur, then the laugh of someone who couldn't catch their mouth in time, then another, then a ripple that grew teeth. I reached the dean. His smile performed responsibility. Pleasant, fixed, professional. It wavered by a hair's breadth when his eyes lingered where hair should have been. He extended the embossed degree. My hand shook when I took it. The parchment felt warm from his palm. I intended to pivot and exit. That was the plan. Get the paper, get off, get out. But my father had always loved an entrance, especially when it interrupted someone else's moment. He rose from his seat as if he were summoned by imaginary applause and walked toward the front, a man with nowhere to be except the center. Bald like her future, he boomed, timing it for the lull in the microphone's feedback, ensuring the system caught it and launched it into the rafters. Laughter, real laughter this time, rolled across the room. I felt it wrap around me like a wet towel. He reached the foot of the stage, and before I could register the intention, he was on the steps, then beside me. "You think a piece of paper makes her someone?" he asked the audience, performing a question that needed no answer. His hand hooked the degree from my fingers with the touchdown confidence of a man who believes the world is a prop. He ripped it down the middle, cleanly, with the untroubled concentration of someone opening mail. The sound of tearing was crisp, surgical. The crowd gasped in a single body. Oxygen sucked out of the space where dignity used to stand. I remember 3 things at once. The dean's hand half raised, suspended, the way the torn halves of my name curled under their own weight, and my mother's laughter slicing through the shock, bright and brittle as glass. "Now she knows what she's worth," she announced to her section. "Bleeding and bald is about her speed." The trophy gleamed on the podium, an award for academic excellence I had accepted earlier while praying they wouldn't attend the morning ceremony. My father lifted it, admired it, then brought it down with theatrical flourish. It connected with the side of my head. The world didn't sharpen or blur, it pivoted, as if someone had lifted the stage and tilted it to the left. A hot streak of pain shot behind my eye and returned as a ringing. I stumbled, caught myself on the podium edge with fingers that didn't feel like mine. Something warm slid down my temple. My cap fell and skittered like a crab. 100 reactions assembled at once. A woman in the 3rd row stood, then sat, then stood again. A boy in a Letterman jacket recorded with his mouth open. Somebody said Jesus under their breath in a way that suggested it wasn't a prayer. The dean moved late, as though wading through invisible syrup. "Sir," he said finally, voice thin with disbelief. "Sir." My father grinned at the crowd, defiant, almost triumphant. He loved the sound of his own offense. My mother clapped, tiny manic pats of the fingertips, perfectly polite applause for a monstrous act. My sister smiled for a second too long, then arranged her face into something like concern, the way you might drape a cloth over a stain. I pressed the sleeve of my gown to my head and felt the sticky heat of blood. It surprised me that the realization didn't sink me. I didn't faint. I didn't break. Something else happened instead. Something hardened. Not a wall exactly, but a brace. The laughter that had always knocked me sideways struck and found a place to go that wasn't the softest part of me. The auditorium shifted. The laughter lost its easy edges, thinned, frayed. People looked at one another and recognized themselves in what they were enabling. A few booed, uncertain, then more certain. A security guard I'd never noticed before began moving up the aisle, pulling purpose onto his shoulders like a jacket he hadn't expected to wear. The dean slid between me and my father, too late to prevent everything, just in time to look like he had tried. I bent and picked up the broken cap with my free hand. The tassel dragged like a tail. I looked down at the halves of the degree scattered at my feet, then up at the sea of faces, some pitying, some appalled, some embarrassed to be caught enjoying it. I found my parents in the crowd, my father vibrating with the thrill of spectacle, my mother shining with the reflected glow of cruelty, my sister drinking in attention in whatever form it came. And I understood something with a clarity that cut cleaner than the trophy's edge. They only won when I absorbed their story about me. They only fed on shame. They needed an audience more than air. So I did the single most difficult, simplest thing. I turned and walked off the stage. The whispers chased me, then hesitated, then fell away. Behind me, voices collided. Administrators conferring in urgent whispers, my father complaining about jokes, my mother complaining about sensitivity, a smattering of claps from someone who thought any movement deserved applause. Each step steadied. With every footfall, the ringing quieted. The pain located itself rather than drowning everything else. The torn parchment skittered under someone's shoe. The sound was absurdly loud. By the time I reached the wings, my hands had stopped shaking. Blood had dried tacky against my temple. I paused, turned my head so the light caught the smudge, and looked back at them. The stage that had been theirs, a place where they could rewrite me into ridicule, had turned into an exhibit of who they were, and they didn't even know it yet. I pressed the heel of my hand just above my brow and breathed. A promise rose, steady as a pulse. This will be the last time they laugh at me, not because they will stop, because I will end the audience they rely on. I straightened the crooked cap, even though I wasn't going back out there, and stepped into the dim hallway, each footstep a thread pulling me toward whatever came next. Silence became my weapon. After the graduation debacle, my parents wanted noise, rage, begging, hysterics. They wanted another performance they could twist into proof of my weakness. Instead, I gave them nothing. The first night back home, they paraded through the hallway with the torn halves of my diploma, holding them up like victory flags. My father tossed the shredded parchment against my bedroom door. "Decoration," he said, laughing. "You should thank us for giving your wall some character." My mother chimed in from behind him, her voice lilting with mock sympathy. "Don't sulk, sweetheart. Plenty of bald clowns have made a career out of humiliation." I sat on my bed in silence, staring at the jagged papers on the carpet. Their voices reached through the wood of my door, searching for a reaction. I pressed my phone's record button and waited. The following day, my sister swept through the kitchen in her clean graduation gown. She forgot to hang it in her closet, draping it across the dining room chairs, letting the golden honor cords shimmer in the light like trophies. "Isn't it pretty?" she asked no one in particular. "Some of us get to keep ours." She smirked, eyes grazing mine, daring me to speak. I didn't. Instead, I tucked the moment away like a hunter placing bait. At night, I lingered outside the living room while my father replayed his favorite clip, the video of the trophy striking my head. He'd uploaded it to a private folder, but couldn't resist watching it over and over, belly shaking with laughter. "Best family joke yet," he bragged to my mother. "Raising her this way is called parenting." I stood in the shadows, my phone angled, recording every word. My pulse throbbed in my ears, but my hands stayed steady. Each second became evidence, ammunition. Days turned into weeks. The house filled with little cruelties. My mother would pass my room, muttering, "Still bald, still pathetic." My father mimed taking photos whenever I entered a room, holding up his phone like I was a zoo exhibit. My sister paraded her new office badge on a lanyard, dangling it before me. "At least one of us is employable," she quipped. I let them believe they were winning. I swallowed every insult, met every smirk with silence. What they mistook for defeat was calculation. I began to notice their hunger. They craved validation more than food, more than love. My father's jokes only landed if someone laughed. My mother's cruelty sharpened when she had an audience. My sister's pride swelled only when others admired her. Without attention, they withered. That was their weakness. So I collected everything. Every laugh, every jeer, every whispered cruelty became a file on my phone. I named each clip carefully, as though cataloging a museum of horrors. Bald like her future, trophy smash, bleeding and bald, shiny head joke. At night, I lay in bed scrolling through the recordings, listening not to my pain, but to their voices, gleeful, unguarded, damning. The more I heard, the clearer it became. They had built their empire of cruelty on performance. If they loved an audience so much, then one day I would give them one. One evening, as my father roared with laughter over the same video for the 20th time, I pressed my phone tighter against the wall to capture every word. My mother's voice chimed in. "The neighbors still talk about it. They said they've never seen such commitment to comedy." "Good," my father replied, pride thick in his tone. "She finally brought us something useful." I stopped recording, staring into the dark of my room. My hands no longer trembled. The fear that used to claw at my ribs had hardened into something sharper. "They love an audience," I whispered into the silence, a vow forming in the shape of my breath. "Then I'll give them one they'll never forget." The invitation arrived, not in my hand, but shouted down the hall. "Big night Friday," my father called, his voice swelling with pride as though announcing the arrival of royalty. My sister had landed an entry-level office job, something modest, ordinary, but to my parents it was cause for a coronation. They rented a hall, ordered banners, and invited half the neighborhood. It wasn't about her achievement, it was about their reflection in it. For 2 days straight, the house buzzed with preparations. My mother barked orders, arranging catering menus with the seriousness of a general planning a war campaign. White roses, she instructed. They symbolize purity, not like you. She threw me a glance sharp enough to nick the skin. My father rehearsed his speech in front of the mirror, slipping in jokes about me with a showman's timing. Some children make you proud, some make you laugh, he practiced, chuckling at himself. I stayed quiet, watching, listening, recording. Every cruel rehearsal joined the library of evidence on my phone. Each barb was another stone in the wall I was building, not to hide behind, but to trap them inside. The night arrived sweltering and thick, the air heavy with summer humidity and self-importance. I slipped into a simple black dress, one that didn't attempt to hide my scalp. The hair had started to grow back in uneven patches, tufts of stubborn regrowth like weeds breaking through cracked concrete. My mother sneered when she saw me. "Still playing the tragic figure?" she muttered. "At least wear a scarf. You're embarrassing." I didn't. I wanted the room to see. I wanted them to look and then to listen. The rented hall shimmered with artificial glamour, strings of lights draped along the ceiling, a banner reading, "Pride of the Family," stretched across the back wall. My sister stood near the entrance, basking in attention. She wore her office lanyard like a crown, guests cooing over her as though she had been knighted. My parents hovered close, their smiles practiced, their hands constantly gesturing toward her like presenters revealing a prize. When I walked in, the room shifted. Whispers rippled. A woman covered her mouth too late. My father nudged my mother. "She's really committed to the comedy role," he muttered, grinning. My mother chuckled. She should thank us for giving her a new personality. The words slid off me. I no longer absorbed them. I was storing them, letting them collect weight until the floor beneath my family's pride would collapse. The program began with speeches. My mother introduced my sister with trembling pride, tears carefully poised at the corners of her eyes. "Our daughter has always been destined for greatness," she said, her voice cracking at rehearsed intervals. She didn't glance at me once, as though I didn't exist. My father followed, beaming as he took the microphone. "Some kids bring home awards," he began, "and some bring home entertainment." Laughter stirred uneasily among the crowd, but he pushed forward, warmed by his own cleverness. "Guess which one this bald bird is." The guests laughed, not from amusement, but from obligation. Politeness forced sound from their throats. I studied their faces, strained smiles, darting eyes, discomfort hidden under applause. They didn't know it yet, but their loyalty was paper thin. I sat still, my phone resting in my hand beneath the table. I waited for the laughter to thin, to falter. My father's voice boomed again. "But enough about her. Tonight we celebrate success, beauty, and promise." He gestured toward my sister, who waved demurely like a pageant queen. I rose. Chairs scraped behind me as people shifted, surprised. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "Oh, here comes the pity show," she whispered, loud enough for the nearest guest to hear. My father smirked, phone already raised, eager to record my breakdown for later laughter. But I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I walked to the microphone with steady steps, feeling every eye in the room lock onto me. My scalp prickled under the lights, but this time it wasn't shame that burned. It was clarity. The microphone caught the sound of my breath as I lifted my phone and pressed play. My father's voice filled the hall, booming and unmistakable. "Bald like her future!" Gasps scattered across the crowd. Some guests laughed nervously, unsure if it was part of a routine. Others glanced at one another, uneasy. My mother shifted in her chair, her smile faltering. Before the silence could settle, I played the next clip. My mother's voice, sharp and gleeful. Now she knows what she's worth, bleeding and bald. The room stilled. The smiles froze. My sister's hand twitched on her lanyard, her face paling as though her crown had turned into a noose. And then came her voice, sneering into the microphone of the past. Careful not to blind the audience when the lights hit your shiny head. Every whispered cruelty, every performance of humiliation now echoed back at them, undeniable, amplified. The hall no longer felt like their stage. It had become their trial. I let the clips hang in the air, one after another, the sound system turning their laughter into evidence. The audience sat stiff, caught between horror and disbelief. My father lowered his phone slowly, the grin draining from his face as the weight of recognition set in. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Not yet. The room belonged to the truth now, and the truth was louder than any of their jokes. The microphone buzzed faintly as I stood there, my phone in hand, the room smothered by silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like it has weight, pressing down on shoulders and stomachs. Dozens of faces stared at me. Neighbors, relatives, co-workers of my parents. People who had clapped seconds earlier now sat frozen, their smiles stiff as porcelain. My father, who only minutes ago had been brimming with smug confidence, shifted in his chair. The corners of his mouth twitched, straining to curl upward again, as though he could will the moment back into comedy. "That's taken out of context," he said, his voice oddly thin. His phone was still in his hand, but for once, he wasn't recording. I didn't look at him. I pressed another file. The speakers erupted with his drunken laughter, followed by the distinct sound of paper tearing. His voice thundered through the hall, amplified larger than life. "You think a piece of paper makes her someone?" Then the recorded sound of my diploma ripping, clear and undeniable. A murmur of shock rippled through the room. People shifted, whispering. My Aunt Vivian clutched her necklace so tightly I thought the chain might snap. My mother leaned forward in her seat, her voice raised in protest. "This isn't what it sounds like. We were just—" But the recording cut her off. "Now she knows what she's worth. Look at her bleeding and bald. That's the only stage she belongs on." Her words, from weeks ago, filled the hall with venom she could no longer disguise. Gasps fluttered across the audience. Someone muttered, "My God!" Another whispered, "She said that?" My mother's cheeks flushed, her practice mask cracking as eyes turned on her. I lifted my gaze, scanning the room slowly, letting the silence settle after each clip. My sister squirmed, her lanyard twisting in her hands, her lips parting as though to protest, but nothing came out. And then came the final recording. I hadn't planned to use it tonight, not until I saw my father's smirk lingering, that stubborn defiance in his eyes. I tapped play. His voice again, laughing uncontrollably, almost choking on his own amusement. "Best family joke yet!" A pause, then my mother's laugh, layered over it. Poisonous, triumphant. The sound was unmistakable. The very moment after the trophy had slammed into my head. The audience stiffened. Conversations broke out in urgent whispers. A man in the back row pushed his chair away with a screech. Someone hissed, "That's abuse." A woman covered her child's ears. I lowered the phone. I didn't shout. I didn't beg for sympathy. My voice, when I finally spoke, was calm, steady, and deliberate. "You wanted everyone to laugh at me. Tonight they've heard who you really are. Let's see who's laughing with you now." The words hung in the air like a verdict. I stepped away from the microphone, letting it screech with feedback before settling into silence. My father's mouth opened and closed, fish-like. His bravado collapsed. My mother clutched at her purse as though it contained an escape. My sister's eyes darted to the audience, searching desperately for someone, anyone, to smile back at her. No one did. The relatives who used to gather eagerly around them now shifted in their seats, disgust plain on their faces. Neighbors stared with thinly veiled contempt. My father's co-worker leaned toward another guest and whispered loudly enough for me to hear. He bragged about his daughter while doing that. My parents, who had built their lives around image, around appearances, suddenly stood naked before their audience. Every cruel performance they had orchestrated had been thrown back at them, undeniable and grotesque. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Each step echoed in the hall, louder than the mutters and gasps. My parents' world was collapsing, and I didn't need to stay to watch it burn. Behind me, my mother's voice cracked, shrill and panicked. "It's not true. She's twisting everything." My father's deeper bellow followed. "This is manipulation." My sister's high-pitched protests overlapped. "She's lying. You don't understand." But no one rushed to defend them. No one laughed. No one clapped. Their stage, once so full of applause, was suffocating under the silence of betrayal. At the doorway, I paused, just long enough to hear it, the crumbling of their pride under the weight of exposure. The whispers of neighbors, the disgust of relatives, the quiet retreat of people who would never see them the same way again. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself the smallest smile, not of joy, not even of triumph, but of release, because the joke wasn't on me anymore. When I let go of the microphone and walked toward the doors, the air behind me turned brittle. I didn't need to look back to know my family was scrambling to plug holes in a dam already shattered. Their voices chased me anyway, ricocheting against the walls of the hall. "She edited that!" my mother cried, her pitch climbing like a desperate bird. "That's not what I said." But her protest collided with her own recorded laughter, still echoing in the audience's heads. "She's manipulating you all," my father thundered, pounding his fist against the table for emphasis. Yet no one applauded, no one chuckled. His voice, once a weapon, sounded small against the thick quiet of a room that had already judged him. I slowed my pace near the doorway, curiosity tugging at me like a thread. I turned slightly, enough to take in the scene. Rows of relatives leaned away from my parents, as if cruelty were contagious. Neighbors who had once adored their sharp tongues now whispered, eyes wide, hands half raised to mouths. My Aunt Vivian stood, her face pale. "How could you?" she asked, voice trembling. "She's your daughter." My mother's mask cracked, her mouth opening and closing without words. My father barked, "She deserved discipline. You don't know what she's like at home." But the murmurs swelled, louder than him now. "Discipline?" someone repeated in disbelief. That was abuse. In the far row, Mrs. Patel, the neighbor who had smiled uneasily at me that morning, rose to her feet. Her little boy tugged at her hand, whispering questions, but her eyes were locked on my parents. "I believed you when you said she was troubled," she said, voice firm. "Now I see who the trouble really was." The words struck like stones. My father flinched as though the truth had physical weight. My sister stood then, her face contorted with panic. She raised her hands as if calming an unruly class. "You're all overreacting. You don't understand our family. It's our humor, our way." Her voice faltered under the heavy stares. Someone snorted bitterly. Another shook their head in disgust. Her smile shattered. I watched the cracks spread across them, the three people who had built their power on the stage of ridicule now drowning under the silence of their audience. My father reached for his phone, as if recording the disaster might rewrite it, but his hands shook. My mother clutched her purse to her chest like a shield. My sister's eyes darted wildly, searching for one friendly face, but finding none. And then came the sound I had been waiting for. Not laughter, not applause. A long, collective exhale of disappointment. The sound of people turning away. Chairs scraped as relatives stood, shaking their heads. Neighbors gathered their children. Invitations were declined without words, just with silence, with backs turning, with exits made in awkward clusters. The hall that had been decorated to celebrate my sister's new job was transforming into a courtroom, and the verdict was exile. I didn't need to speak again. Their downfall was speaking for me. But still, I allowed myself one final line, pitched just loud enough to carry. I turned back to the crowd, to my parents, to my sister, and said, "You wanted an audience. Here they are. Listen to what they hear." Then I left. The night air outside was cooler than I'd expected, brushing my raw scalp with a gentleness I hadn't felt in years. Behind me, muffled shouts overlapped. My mother's frantic pleas, my father's furious denials, my sister's shrill voice unraveling. None of it mattered anymore. For once, their laughter had died, and nothing they could do would bring it back. The house was quieter after that night, but not with peace. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the smoke clears, charred, heavy, waiting for the next explosion. Neighbors who once dropped by with pies or gossip no longer came. The Patel boy didn't wave from the yard anymore. His mother pulled him inside when she saw my parents outside. My father's phone buzzed less often. No calls from friends asking him to come out for drinks, no colleagues inviting him to barbecues. My mother, who lived for Sunday brunches with her ladies, now stared at her phone, scrolling through group chats that had grown eerily silent. At first, they pretended not to notice. My mother clattered around the kitchen with more force than necessary, slamming pots on burners, muttering about jealous neighbors. My father swore under his breath when his boss stopped returning texts. "Cowards, he spat one evening, tossing his phone onto the couch. "Spineless hypocrites." But even in their denial, I could see the cracks. My sister returned from work one evening, her face pale, her smile forced. She threw her lanyard onto the counter and snapped at no one in particular. They've all seen it, my coworkers. They looked at me like I'm diseased. Don't be dramatic, my mother said sharply, though her voice trembled. They'll forget. They won't, my sister exploded, her voice shrill. They don't forget videos like that. Do you have any idea what it's like to walk into the office and hear people whispering behind your back? They think I'm like you two. Her words struck like shrapnel. My mother flinched. My father growled, "Watch your mouth." I sat at the table silently, spooning soup into my bowl, watching them unravel. They barely noticed me anymore, except when they wanted a target. My father occasionally barked, "Happy now? You ruined us." My mother hissed, "Ungrateful witch." My sister glared daggers, blaming me for her tarnished crown. But their rage lacked weight now. It was hollow, rattling in the empty shell of their former pride. At night, their fights shook the walls. I heard doors slam, glass break, voices rise into jagged screams. Sometimes my father stormed outside, his car tearing down the street. Sometimes my mother locked herself in the bathroom, sobbing so loudly it echoed through the pipes. I lay in my room listening, not with fear anymore, but with a strange detachment. It was like watching actors stumble through the wrong lines of a play they no longer controlled. One night my sister pounded on my door. "You're pathetic," she hissed when I opened it. Her eyes were red, mascara streaked. "Do you think you won? You think this makes you strong? You've ruined everything. Our family name, my reputation. You're poison." I studied her for a long moment. "Funny," I said quietly. "That's what I used to think about you." Then I shut the door. Her fist struck the wood once, twice, then retreated down the hall. Lying in bed afterward, I felt something unexpected. Satisfaction, yes, but also heaviness. Revenge had tasted sharp and intoxicating, but as the days wore on, it left behind an aftertaste I couldn't ignore. Watching them break didn't erase the scars they had carved into me. Sometimes, late at night, I caught myself wishing, against all reason, that my mother would knock gently and apologize, that my father would sit, eyes lowered, and admit he was wrong, that my sister would whisper, "I envied you, I'm sorry." But those things never came. What came instead was silence, fights, bitterness. Revenge had stripped away their masks, but it hadn't built me a new home. One evening, as thunder rolled outside, I stood at my bedroom window, watching rain trail down the glass. The house behind me rattled with another fight. My mother screamed something about bills. My father shouted about respect. My sister cried that she couldn't face her friends anymore. And I realized with piercing clarity, I wasn't trapped anymore. I was simply still here. I whispered into the rain, "Maybe revenge isn't enough." Weeks stretched into months, and the echo of that night never left. The hall, the recordings, the silence that swallowed my parents whole, it all lingered, replaying in the community, like an open secret no one wanted to name directly. At first, I thought their lives would simply continue with embarrassment clinging to them like a stubborn stain, but shame has a way of growing, of spreading, until it touches every corner. My father was the first to feel it at work. He had always been the loudest voice in the office, the self-proclaimed joker, the man who believed colleagues were an audience, not equals. But now, I overheard him on the phone late at night, voice strained. "No, I wasn't. That's not what happened. You can't believe everything you hear." The pauses were longer each time, his bluster collapsing into pleading. One evening he slammed the receiver down and muttered, "Bastards. They're using it as an excuse. Jealousy, that's all." But I saw the truth when he left the next morning without his usual confidence. His tie was crooked, his shoes scuffed. He came home earlier each day, shoulders hunched, eyes dulled. He drank more, his laughter a brittle thing that cracked before it finished. My mother unraveled differently. Her power had always been her charm, the way she curated friendships, wove influence through gossip and favors. Now her brunch group ignored her messages. She lingered by the phone, scrolling endlessly, waiting for an invitation that never came. Her bitterness fermented. She started drinking in the afternoons, wine glass clinking against the counter as she muttered about ungrateful friends and two-faced neighbors. Sometimes she stared at me with glassy eyes, her lips curling into a sneer. "Hope you're proud," she'd slur. "Hope you enjoy watching your mother rot." My sister fared no better. At her office, whispers dogged her every step. She came home one night, tossing her heels into the corner, collapsing onto the couch. "They saw the video," she said flatly, staring at the ceiling. "They'll never look at me the same." My father tried to comfort her, but his words were useless. "Ignore them," he said. "You're still the golden one." But she shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping. "Golden? I'm radioactive." Her friends, the ones who once circled her like planets around the sun, stopped answering calls. Invitations to parties vanished. She spent more nights locked in her room, music blasting to drown out the world. I watched all this unfold, and at first, satisfaction filled me. Every insult, every cruelty, every humiliation they'd heaped on me was being returned to them in kind by the world they had tried so hard to impress. But late at night, when the house was quiet except for the creak of settling wood, guilt began to whisper. I hadn't planned for this, for the depth of their collapse. I wanted them exposed, yes. I wanted them stripped of their power, but watching them wither was different than imagining it. My father's hollow eyes, my mother's bitter slurs, my sister's broken laughter. It didn't erase what they'd done to me, but it also didn't feel clean. One evening, as my father sat staring at an untouched dinner plate, I found myself asking silently, was this justice or was it cruelty answering cruelty? The question gnawed at me, because even after everything, some small part of me still longed for their love, for a mother who would braid my hair gently instead of ripping it out with clippers, for a father who would cheer my victories instead of filming my humiliation, for a sister who would defend me instead of mocking me. But those people had never existed, only these broken ones remained. I sat in my room that night, scrolling through the recordings again. Their voices no longer burned, they sounded empty, pathetic, desperate for control. The power they once held over me had dissolved. And for the first time, I wondered if keeping them trapped in their downfall was keeping me trapped too. It happened on a night when the air inside the house felt too tight, as though the walls themselves were pressing inward. Rain hammered against the windows, the storm outside echoing the one that had been building between us for weeks. Dinner sat untouched on the table. My mother had cooked out of habit, though no one had appetite anymore. My father pushed peas around his plate like a bored child. My sister stared at her phone, thumbs frozen above the screen, and I sat across from them, my own silence thick enough to choke on. Finally, my father slammed his fist on the table. Silverware rattled, glasses tipped. "Enough," he barked, eyes bloodshot, his voice trembling not with strength but with desperation. "What you did, Elara, it destroyed us. You shamed your family in front of the entire community. Do you feel powerful now?" I lifted my gaze slowly. His face was blotched, lines etched deeper from weeks of bitterness. "Destroyed you?" My voice was calm, steady. "No. I only showed the world who you already were." My mother shot up from her chair, pointing a finger at me. "Liar! You twisted everything, made us look like monsters. That's not who we are." A humorless laugh escaped my lips. "Not who you are. Should I replay the clips again? Because I have them all. Your words, your laughter. Every second you thought no one was watching." Her mouth snapped shut, but her eyes burned with fury. Then my sister's voice cut through, brittle and sharp. "You think you're righteous, don't you? You think you're some kind of hero, but you're just as cruel. You ruined my life too." I turned to her. "You mocked me on the day I needed you most. You smiled while they destroyed me. And you did it because you were afraid. Afraid if you didn't join them, you'd become me." Her face crumpled, the mask she wore at work, at home, everywhere, cracking into pieces. "I had no choice," she whispered, tears brimming. "They made me pick sides." "You always had a choice," I said quietly. "You just chose survival over sisterhood." My father shoved his chair back, rising to his full height. "Don't you dare turn this around. We raised you. We clothed you. Fed you." "And humiliated me at every turn," I snapped, my voice finally breaking its leash. "You made me your entertainment, your scapegoat. Every bruise, every insult, every laugh at my expense. You called it parenting, but it was cruelty. You didn't raise me. You tried to bury me." For a moment, no one spoke. The storm outside filled the silence, lightning flashing against the glass. My mother sank back into her chair, her face pale, lips trembling. We only wanted to keep you humble, to toughen you. The world is cruel." "The world is cruel enough without you making it worse," I answered. My sister's tears slipped free, trailing black lines of mascara down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice so faint it barely carried over the storm. I should have stopped them. I should have defended you. I studied her face, searching for sincerity. Maybe she meant it. Maybe guilt had finally broken through, but apologies spoken this late felt like ashes. They didn't rebuild what had burned. I don't need your sorry, I said. I need you to live with the truth of what you did. All of you. My father sagged, his anger collapsing into exhaustion. For the first time, he looked smaller than I remembered, deflated, a man who had mistaken fear for respect his entire life. So what now? He muttered. You walk away and pretend you're better than us? I stood slowly, pushing my chair back. Not pretend, I said. Become. Their eyes followed me as I moved toward the door, the storm's wind whistling through the cracks. Behind me, the family I had once begged for love sat broken, their voices stripped of power, their cruelty exposed for what it was. I turned back one last time, meeting each of their gazes. This house is drowning in rot. If you want to survive, you'll have to change yourselves, but I won't be here to watch. And with that, I stepped out into the storm. The storm followed me as I left the house, rain slashing across my skin, soaking through my clothes until I felt reborn in water. For once, I didn't rush for cover. I let it wash me, let it sting against the raw patches of scalp, as if nature itself was scrubbing away the residue of every insult, every laugh, every scar my family had carved into me. By the time I reached the bus stop at the end of our street, I knew with bone-deep certainty I wasn't going back. The next morning, I moved quietly, deliberately. I packed my belongings into 2 suitcases, folding my clothes with care, not haste. The broken pieces of my trophy still sat on the shelf where my father had flung them months ago. I gathered them into a small box, sealed it, and placed it on the dresser. They were his weapon once. They would not be mine. But the gown, the blood-stained, humiliated relic of that night, I kept until last. I held it in my hands, staring at the faint streaks across the fabric, stiff with dried shame. My chest tightened. This gown had been meant to represent triumph, but it had been twisted into a costume of ridicule. Now it was something else entirely, evidence of survival. I carried it outside to the backyard. The storm had passed, leaving the air damp and heavy. I struck a match, watched the flame catch, and laid the gown across the fire pit. The fabric curled, blackened, turned to ash. Smoke coiled upward, carrying with it the weight of that night. I stood there until nothing was left but smoldering embers. When the ashes cooled, I whispered aloud, to no one and to myself, "You don't own me anymore." With my suitcases in hand, I walked past the living room where my family sat in sullen silence. My father's eyes followed me, empty of fight. My mother clutched a glass of wine at 10 in the morning, her lips trembling but speechless. My sister looked down, avoiding my gaze, as though the weight of what she'd done was too heavy to meet head-on. None of them tried to stop me. None of them even stood. I left the key on the counter and stepped outside into the waiting light. The bus carried me through streets I had memorized since childhood, past neighbors who no longer waved, past the school where I had once dreamed of escaping, past the hall that had become my family's undoing. Each landmark receded like ghosts dissolving behind me. As the city unfolded ahead, I thought about what lay beyond revenge. I had lived my life defined by their cruelty, by their laughter and the wounds it left. Exposing them had given me power, but power wasn't the same as healing. Healing would take something else, distance, time, the courage to build a life that had nothing to do with them. For the first time, that future felt possible. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, a place with creaking floors and peeling wallpaper, but sunlight that poured through the windows in golden floods. I filled it with plants, secondhand books, and silence that belonged only to me. Some nights, the old recordings still played in my head, their laughter echoing like ghosts. But I no longer trembled when I heard them. I let them pass through me, powerless. One evening, I stood before the mirror, tracing the short tufts of hair sprouting across my scalp. They weren't long, weren't perfect, but they were mine, stubborn, growing back against all odds. I smiled, because the truth was clear now. My family mistook cruelty for power, but cruelty corrodes. It devours the ones who wield it until they're hollow. They had laughed for years, believing their stage was unshakable, but I had turned it into their cage, their mirror, their downfall. And I was free. As I lay in bed that night, the city humming softly outside my window, I whispered the final vow I had been waiting to make. They will never laugh at me again, not because they can't, but because I no longer care. The promise settled into my bones, not heavy like revenge, but light like release. For the first time in my life, I closed my eyes and dreamed not of escape, not of vengeance, but of tomorrow.